All right, so read chapter 12 for Friday and do a chapter analysis for that, please. Okay, after chapter 12, what do you think we're going to do? It's a trick question. We're going to skip chapter 13. Sorry, IA people. Chapter 13 uses an expanded model of ISLM to look at the global macroeconomy. It's a straightforward application. We're going to go on to more interesting stuff. Hey, Sierra, glad you could make it. Hi, Sierra's name. Anyway, maybe she's not here. Sierra, can you hear me? Sierra. Well, hopefully she's there. All right. So read chapter 14 for Monday and submit a chapter analysis. Okay, we will probably start chapter 14 on Friday. That's okay. We are finally going to get done with the ISLM model. Okay, and then on Wednesday, I will assign homework number 6. Think about when you want it due. You know, I think the earliest should be Wednesday of next week. But look at your schedules and think about what you want to do for that. All right. One last thought. So many of you know that I'm teaching Econ 405 next semester. Econ 405 is contemporary economic issues, which I interpret as contemporary macro issues because, after all, there's nothing other than macro. Anyway, I think what we will be doing next semester, if this interests you, is studying the current recession that we're going into. I was able to do this once before, and studying the recession while we're in it is really kind of fun. So that's probably going to be the main issue that we do next semester. So if that interests you, you have the prerequisite to get into the course. So Econ 405 with green law. I know, it's more fun than you can imagine, but I just thought I'd put it out there.
Does that kind of is that going to be the same style of class as like a 300 or 462 class?
I don't know what that means because I don't teach those courses. No, it is not a research class. I mean, it is not a quantitative class. It is applied macro. I mean, what we will do is we will look at the data on what's happening in the US economy, and then we will use the theories that we develop in this class, our class, to try to understand what the data are telling us. So it's very much an applied class where the outcome is basically our analysis of what's going on, okay? There is no right answer. There are no exams in that class. It's just gonna be reading, research, and writing, basically. So that's kind of it. But I'm happy to take any other questions that people might have. Hearing none, let's move ahead. I will share the PowerPoint with you. And there it is. Okay, near-term goals. I don't know how far we'll get today, but we're going to start by going over homework number 4. Then I'm going to make the point that the effectiveness of monetary and fiscal policy depends on the slopes of the IS and LM curves. And obviously it depends on the underlying parameters that affect those slopes. So as an example, we're going to look at the Keynesian liquidity trap because it's pretty cool and pretty fun. Then I'm going to make the point that fiscal and monetary policy are, or at least should be, complementary. Okay. Then I already mentioned homework 6, so that is coming down the pipeline. And then the final step, which we may not get to today, is deriving the aggregate demand curve. I think this is fun to do because everybody's familiar with the aggregate demand curve, but you don't learn where it comes from in the principles class. And so I thought I would show you how that works. Without giving too much away, the aggregate demand curve comes from ISLM analysis. So it's a straightforward extension of that. All right, any questions? Hearing none, let's go on to the homework. All right. Homework number 4. How does an increase in the expenditure multiplier affect the slope of the IS curve? So we start with an IS curve, okay? And I wanted to remind you that when we move along the IS curve, we start at a point like B and we end up at a point like C. What happens is first the interest rate declines, then GDP increases. So we want to think about the interest rate decline and the increase in GDP. Okay. So what happens is interest rate goes down. What does that do to autonomous expenditure? Lower interest rates. What happens to investment, autonomous consumption, that sort of thing? Matthew?
It increases.
It increases. Okay. An increase in autonomous expenditure then does what to GDP?
It increases it by a proportionately larger amount.
Correct. It increases by a multiple of that. So what determines how much the decrease in investment expenditure increases autonomous expenditure? What determines how much a decrease in the interest rate affects, say, investment spending?
Multiplier.
What's that? No, not the multiplier. The decrease in the interest rate causes an increase in autonomous expenditure based on the interest elasticity of autonomous expenditure, right? That was the case that we did last class. Then we get an increase in autonomous expenditure. How much does GDP go up? Well, that depends on the spending multiplier. Now, in this case, the interest elasticity is held constant, but we're increasing the multiplier. The interest elasticity is held constant, so the same decrease in interest rate causes the same increase in autonomous expenditure. But with a larger multiplier, what happens to GDP?
Gets bigger.
It gets bigger. So instead of going from B to C, we're going from B to C prime, because the multiplier causes GDP to grow more. And the result of that is a rotation of the IS curve, a flattening of the IS curve around the original point. So what questions do you have about that?
So would it get steeper if the multiplier stays the same, but the investment change? What's the other
elasticity of
Elasticity.
autonomous, the interest elasticity of autonomous expenditure?
Yeah.
If that goes down, then the curve gets steeper, yes.
So if the number gets bigger, or if it goes?
No, if the number gets smaller,
Yeah.
the curve gets steeper, because what that would mean is the same decrease in the interest rate then causes less of an increase in autonomous expenditure. And for a given multiplier, that's a smaller increase than C. It would be around here, and that's steeper.
So the multiplier becoming smaller and the interest elasticity getting
Becoming
smaller.
larger. No, becoming smaller, yes.
So they both have the same effect
Yep.
if they get smaller.
Yes. I thought of an evil question to ask you guys. I wouldn't do this, but you know, suppose the multiplier gets bigger, but the interest elasticity of money demand gets smaller. You know, so you got both curves shifting, you know, changing shapes and stuff like that. That would be crazy, but not impossible. Okay, any questions about that?
Are they proportional? As in, if you change them both by the same scale, do you end up at the same point?
Yes. Yeah. Well, no. Okay. I understand what you're asking. I don't know exactly what proportional means. If we were changing the interest elasticity of autonomous expenditure and the interest elasticity of money demand, I get that part. But when you're talking about the multiplier versus the interest elasticity of money demand, I'm not sure how you would make that equivalent necessarily. So I won't be asking you that question. Unless you know, really, really want to do it, then you could do it for fun. I know, macro and fun in the same question, in the same sentence. That's crazy. All right. Now, you can use the same logic to do the assignment that you turned in for today. And I noticed that a couple of groups haven't yet turned them in, so please get them to me by the end of the day so that I can grade those. Okay, so you're going to use the same logic, but you're going to be looking at the LM curve rather than the IS curve, and hopefully that's what you did. All right. Now, part of the reason for developing the IS and the LM curves is, an important part of the reason is to enable us to analyze the effects of monetary and fiscal policy. Okay. It turns out that the effectiveness of monetary and fiscal policy depends on the slopes of those curves. Okay, there are a bunch of different cases. I think you're better off, instead of trying to memorize the case, you're better off trying to understand how the parameters affect the slopes, because then if you learn that, then you can do any possible case. Okay. Now, the one that I wanted to start with, because it's crazy and fun, is the liquidity trap. Is anybody familiar with the liquidity trap already? Did you study that in maybe history of thought or money and banking or something like that? Or is macro the only class where you actually get to do macro? Sad, but maybe it's true. So nobody's heard of that?
Isn't it where monetary policy becomes ineffective, pretty much?
Yes, but why? That is the question.
Because interest rate is low, and interest rate's lower than something.
Yes.
Savings rates are high, right?
No, not the savings rate necessarily. So who's talking? I can't tell. Greg?
Oh, it was me.
Okay. All right. So let's think about this. let's look at the first graph of the liquidity trap. The question is, well, the first question, we've answered this before. Where does the interest elasticity of money demand show up on the money demand graph?
The slope of the MD curve.
Correct. Okay. So if money demand is infinitely elastic with respect to the interest rate, well, first of all, what does that mean? Money demand is infinitely elastic with respect to the interest rate. How does the interest rate affect money demand?
It doesn't.
It does. There's an elasticity. It's gotta affect money demand. This isn't hard. I mean, this is basically based on what the money demand curve looks like.
The higher the interest rate, the lower money demand is.
Yeah, when interest rates go up, money demand goes down. The reason why is because people are more sensitive, more aware of the opportunity cost of holding cash. This is money in your pocket again, right? With higher interest rates, you want to put your money in the bank or somewhere where it's going to earn interest for you. So if money demand is really, really elastic with respect to the interest rates, what does that mean? A small change, a small increase in the interest rate is going to do what to money demand?
Have a large.
Say it again.
It'll have a, so the smaller the change in interest, it'll have a larger influence.
Right, right. The smallest change in the interest rate is going to cause a really large change in money demand. The slightest uptick in the interest rate is going to cause money to flow out of people's pockets into financial markets. If you think back to the flow chart for Monday's class, what does that do to crowding out, by the way?
It limits the effects of crowding out.
Absolutely, it limits the effects of crowding out, okay? So in figure 22 here, the interest elasticity of money demand is infinite. It's totally flat. Whether or not we actually get to infinite doesn't matter. It can be very, very flat in the real world, okay? It doesn't have to literally be infinite. Okay. Now, if you have a virtually horizontal money demand curve, how does that affect what the LM curve looks like?
Won't it make the LM curve flat as well?
It will, like this, okay? So the slope of the money demand curve is gonna affect the slope of the LM curve. They're both reflecting the interest elasticity of money demand. So here we have a basic scenario in the money market. We have our money supply curve. We have, in this case, our very flat money demand curve. And that translates into a normal shaped IS curve and a very flat LM curve. Now, think about monetary policy. Who looks like they want a question? Let's see. Hannah, Lillian, how about you? Okay, suppose we increase the money supply. On the left-hand side, how do we show that? What does the money supply curve do?
Wouldn't it shift to the right?
It shifts to the right. So it's going to look like this. Okay. How do we show the same thing on the LM curve? How do we show, last class we talked about showing an increase in money supply on the LM curve. What did we say?
Didn't it shift outwards as well?
It shifts to the right. So if we're in this situation and the Fed increases the money supply, the LM curve is going to shift to the right. And it's going to look, whoopsie. No, is that two of the same? Yeah, I messed up. It's going to look like this. No, it's not. Okay. Oh, I put the wrong slide in there. I apologize. Okay, this slide was supposed to be the money supply curve shifted out here. And the LM curve, watch carefully, instead of going from here to here, it's going to go from here to here. It's a rightward shift. So what happens to the equilibrium level of GDP? Mar?
It goes up.
Now, look at the graph again. If you take this LM curve and you shift it literally just to the right, what happens to the equilibrium point?
Yeah, I love that. You got a skate park?
Stays the same.
Stays the same, right? Does everybody see that? When you shift this curve, you know, it's still intersecting right here. So what do we conclude from that? Okay, we conclude that monetary policy in this situation is totally ineffective at stimulating GDP. Now let's think about why this is the case. First of all, what would cause money demand to be infinitely elastic, or at least very elastic with respect to the interest rate?
A large amount of inflation.
Yeah, except we don't have inflation either in the world today or in the ISLM model. So that's not the right answer.
Would it have something to do with people's income?
Not really. Okay, let me just tell you. The money demand curve is likely to be flat and the LM curve is likely to be horizontal when interest rates are really, really, really low. Okay. In that situation, people's best guess, well, let me ask you, what do you, if you had to predict interest rates in 10 years, would you predict that they're going to be higher than they are today or lower than they are today?
They're going to be higher.
Higher.
They've got to be, because interest rates are so low. That's the situation that we find ourselves in here, right? People expect that interest rates are going to go up. Now, if interest rates go up, and you need to understand a little bit of finance theory to get this part. What is the relationship between bond prices and bond interest rates? Anybody know?
If the interest rates are higher, are the prices higher?
No, it goes the other way.
It's the other way.
Okay. They are inversely related. Higher interest rates mean lower bond prices. So when interest rates are so low that people expect that they're going to do nothing but go up, people are going to want to hold onto their cash, because if they invest their cash in bonds, when interest rates rise, they will suffer a capital loss. So they're going to wait until interest rates rise, and then they'll buy those bonds at the higher interest rate. That's the logic. Anyway, okay. Another way to think about it is if interest rates are really close to zero, there's really no opportunity cost to holding cash. You get the benefits, but you don't really get any costs from that. So in this scenario, when the Fed increases the money supply, everything else held constant, what should that do to interest rates? increase money supply? Should do what to interest rates? Rachel?
In this model, it won't change.
No, but in general, I'm saying, with normal shape, demand and supply curves.
The increase in money supply would decrease interest rates.
Correct. But in this case, as the interest rate starts to fall, people simply grab onto all of that cash and they hold it as cash. Their demand for cash is virtually unlimited because there's no cost, no opportunity cost of cash, right? So what happens is as much money as the Fed, as much new money as the Fed puts in circulation, people and businesses just grab onto that cash and hold it. They don't actually spend it or invest it or do anything with it. Okay, that's called the liquidity trap. Liquidity is a synonym for money demand. And so it means that money demand is so infinite that monetary policy doesn't do any good. What that means is the interest rate doesn't end up falling. And if the interest rate doesn't end up falling, you don't get the expansionary effect on autonomous expenditure that you ordinarily would when the money supply increases and interest rates go down. Okay. What kind of a situation, aside from what I've already said, yeah, well, I guess I'll just say that. Typically in recessions, the interest elasticity of money demand is higher or high or even, I won't say infinite, but it could be very high. And so the result of that is that monetary policy, it's long been known that monetary policy is not a particularly great way to get us out of recession, because even though the Fed makes credit and money available, that's no guarantee that people are going to spend it. Does that make sense? Aaron, does that make sense? Okay. Okay, so there's a metaphor for this. It's a little econ humor, so if you don't fall off your chair laughing, that's okay, because it is econ humor. So here's the metaphor. The metaphor is you can pull on a string, but you can't push one. You can't push a string. The idea is the Fed is really good at shutting off a boom by simply making credit no longer available. But the converse doesn't hold. Simply by making credit available doesn't necessarily cause a boom or cause an expansion, right? So you can pull a string, you can't push on a string. Rachel's in pain, I can tell. I know, it wasn't that funny. All right. Any questions before we move on? Sierra, are you there? Sierra. Sierra. Sierra, can you hear me? Send me a carrier pigeon. Let me know you're there.
Dr. Greenlaw, if you're saying that monetary policy is not effective again, is out of recessions, why do governments use quantitative easing or the?
Okay. There's a couple ways to answer that question. One is that quantitative easing is a different kind of monetary policy. Quantitative easing, well, if you think about traditional monetary policy, what is the target that the Fed is using with traditional monetary policy? When it does open market operations, how does it know if it's succeeding or not? What's its target?
To increase the current GDP or get consumer spending up?
Okay, no, that's not its target.
Okay.
I mean, ultimately that's the goal, but it's uses a specific target. Has any of you guys had money in banking? You should know that.
Is it to increase the amount of borrowers?
Nope, not it yet. Keep going closer and closer down the trail to the Fed.
Other banks?
Nope. Anybody? Has anybody done the Fed challenge? Is anybody willing to admit it? Okay, the target that the Fed uses is the federal funds rate. Okay? Do you guys know what the federal funds rate is? Do I have to just call on people?
Is that the rate that they loan between other banks?
Yes, it has nothing to do with the Fed other than the Fed uses it as a target. The federal funds rate is the interest rate that banks charge other banks for overnight loans, 24-hour loans, very, very, very short term. Okay. So when the Fed operates by buying and selling treasury bills, short-term treasury securities, and then because all financial markets are related, they look at the effects on the federal funds rate. Okay, so they're either trying to push the federal funds rate up or drive the federal funds rate down. Okay, that's how traditional monetary policy works. Okay, Rob, here's a quick question for you. What is the current federal funds rate? Google it and let us know.
It's currently 0.25%.
So 1/4%, right?
When a month ago it was 1.75%.
Yes. So the federal funds rate is 1/4%. Okay. So we could well be in a liquidity trap. All right. At least the argument was made during the Great Recession back in 2008 that interest rates were so low that we were probably in a liquidity trap. When interest rates are that low, there is no room, or very little room at least, to push them lower. And if you can't push interest rates lower, then there is no expansionary effect, okay? There's this problem called the zero bound problem. Are you familiar with that? What is it, Rob?
I can't remember off the top of my head, to be honest. I recognize the name, but I don't.
Suppose you wanted to borrow money and the bank said, we're going to charge you -5% interest. What does that mean?
It means that they're paying you.
They're going to pay you to take the loan.
Yeah.
Does that make sense in any kind of a world that you know of? No, it doesn't. Okay, so the problem, there is a more sophisticated answer to this, but the basic problem is you can't make interest rates negative, at least not nominal interest rates. And so when short-term rates are already close to zero, you got no room to operate. Okay, so what do you do? Well, remember that the purpose or a purpose of expansionary monetary policy is to stimulate business investment. Businesses borrow longer term than overnight, right? They borrow 3 years, they borrow 5 years, they borrow 10 years, depending on what they're trying to borrow, right? But it's definitely longer term stuff. So there is a connection called the term structure of interest rates. The term structure of interest rates basically says all interest rates are linked because all financial assets are substitutes. So if, say, short-term interest rates start going up, that's going to cause medium-term interest rates to go up and long-term interest rates to go up. Admittedly, the further down the chain you go, the less the impact is, right? So the Fed decided when they started instituting quantitative easing, it may be that the federal funds rate is close to zero, but the 5-year and the 10-year bond rates are not close to zero. So we could try to push those down, and that would have an even more direct effect on business borrowing interest rates, okay? And that's what they did, and that's what quantitative easing is. That still doesn't guarantee that businesses are going to borrow, but at least it gets the interest rates to move in a way that traditional monetary policy doesn't. Jack, did that answer your question? Or Harry? I know it was one of you guys. Good. Okay. All right. Any questions before we move on? All right. So one of the takeaways here is that fiscal and monetary policy should be complementary. Okay. Or to put it differently, if the Fed is trying, if the Congress is trying to pump up the economy and the Fed is trying to depress the economy, where do we go?
We should just remain where we are.
We go nowhere, but we go there quickly. Okay, so it makes no sense for the Fed and the fiscal authorities to be operating at cross purposes. And yet there have been times in history when that's what's happened. The reason being that the Fed is one set of decision makers and the Congress is another set of decision makers. So there's no guarantee that they're going to agree or be on the same page, even though that we know that effectively speaking, if you want policy to work, monetary and fiscal policy should be complementary. Okay, makes sense? Now, why would it not be? Well, we know that fiscal policy has a bias towards budget deficits, right? Congressmen love to cut taxes and they love to increase spending. So it is more likely that they will run deficits than surpluses. So that automatically puts expansionary pressure on the economy. At various times, the Fed may worry about inflation, and so they may raise interest rates to head off the inflation issue. We're going to talk more about that in chapter 14. Okay, so it's not that they always work together, though they sometimes do. Okay, let me show you an example of them working together. And I want to do it on the whiteboard because the whiteboard is fun. And maybe I got tired of making figures today, but I'm not going to admit that. So let me stop sharing here and I will share the whiteboard. Here's the whiteboard. All right. You would think that I would get better at this, right? Okay, don't answer that. All right. Now let's. It just doesn't like me today. Okay, we'll kill it. Start over. 1, 2. All right, there's 1. There's 2. All right. Okay, so this is interest rates. This is GDP. And then we have, let's see, let's change the color a bit. Here's our IS curve. Here's our LM curve. And then let's change this to text. Okay, LM, text, IS. All right, everybody with me so far? Okay, we have our equilibrium interest rate. Oopsie. Got to get rid of that. Here's our initial interest rate. Here is our initial GDP level. Now, if I was really good at this, I would draw a dotted line, but Eric, could you? All right. Okay. Now, let's suppose we want to do an expansionary fiscal policy. Okay, so we want to increase government spending. Maybe this is the effects of the fiscal stimulus package that the Senate just passed today. How do we show an increase in government spending? Peter, what do you think? How do we show an increase in government spending?
Moving it right.
Moving what right?
The interest rates?
Nope, that would be monetary policy. Matthew, what do you think? Matthew, I think you're muted.
Oh, sorry, I was muted. Can you repeat the question, please?
Question is, how do we show an increase in government spending on this graph?
That would be an increase in autonomous expenditure.
Yes.
So that would mean
Which curve?
Both.
Okay. This is for everybody. What does the LM curve show?
Money demand and money supply.
Correct. And what does the IS curve show?
Y equals EP.
Y equals EP.
Okay, so which of those includes autonomous expenditure?
The IS curve.
This curve.
It's the IS curve. It's the IS curve. Right? So an increase in government spending is going to show up as a rightward shift in the IS curve. Peter, do you see that? Good. Okay. All right. Text, change color, text, and IS prime. Okay. So what's happening, since I've got these fancy tools, is an expansionary fiscal policy is going to shift the IS curve to the right. Okay. Now, assuming that interest rates didn't change, we would see GDP grow all the way to here. But we know that's not going to be the case, because in order to get the money for the additional federal spending, the government needs to borrow it. So it goes into financial markets and increases demand for loanable funds, which is going to do what to interest rates?
Interest rates are going to have to go up.
Yes, they are. And so interest rates are going to go up to here. Back. Oh, I messed that up pretty well. Let's try again. That's better. Okay, so what's the problem with higher interest rates? Remember, we were here. Higher interest rates cause what?
Lower money demand.
Well, yes, but that's not the critical point here. We're moving up the IS curve. What do higher interest rates do on the IS curve?
It's reduced GDP.
It's reduced spending, investment and consumer spending, which we call crowding out, which translates into reduced GDP. Okay. Okay, so So the problem is we get, our fiscal policy does have an impact. Our GDP does increase, but it doesn't increase as much as we thought. And the reason why is because of crowding out. Okay, so this is just the crowding out effect that we showed last class. Okay, is everybody with me? Everybody caught up? Okay, now remember the lesson here was monetary and fiscal policy should complement one another. So what if at the same time that the government increased its borrowing to deficit spend, if the Fed at the same time increased the supply of money? If the Fed increased the supply of money, how do we show that on the graph?
Shifting LM to the right.
The LM curve would shift to the right, sorry, trying to get this right, like that. Okay, and if it works properly, and if I draw on the graph a little tiny bit more carefully, first of all, LM prime, where is our new equilibrium interest rate?
Right where it was.
It's basically where we started. And what happens to GDP?
It increases.
By how much?
Wait.
As much as it would have if there wasn't any crowding out.
That's exactly right. Okay, so fiscal and monetary policy operating together can prevent crowding out from occurring. Think about this. The government prints up, or the Fed prints up a bunch of new money. The government borrows that money and spends it. There's no net increase in demand for loanable funds, and therefore there's no net effect on interest rates. This, by the way, is called an accommodating monetary policy.
Bruno, what did you say? That if they work together, they can eradicate crowding out.
Accommodating monetary policy. Yeah, so what happens is at the same time that government needs to spend more, the Fed increases the money supply. So that offsets entirely, if they get it right, it entirely offsets crowding out. So what you see is the interest rate stays about the same and GDP grows by the full amount of the increase in government spending times the multiplier, right? So it ends up right here. Maybe I need to draw the rest of that in just to be a little clear. There. Okay, anybody have questions?
How in the first scenario with just a fiscal policy, how again did, or not how, why did the interest rate?
Okay. What happened was, in order to spend more, the government had to borrow money in financial markets. That increased demand for borrowing pushed the interest rate up. Does that make sense, Chester?
Yes.
Okay. Other questions? Let me take a picture so I can share this graph with you, since you might on it. Oh, that didn't work. Absolutely didn't work. Okay. Now, come on, you dumb thing, you. All right. Where did my whiteboard go? There it is. All right. Command Shift 4. Okay, got it. All right. Any more questions? We are over time. I apologize.
So when going back to the liquidity trap, when money demand was infinitely elastic,
yes,
how would you show increase or decrease in interest when it's just a flat line? The whole money demand curve would just go up?
That's the point. No, I mean, the only way for the interest rate to go up is if the curve shifts vertically, which it cannot do. It can only shift right and left.
There isn't something in place that they could manually force the interest rate?
I don't think so. I don't think it works that way. I think we just better hope that we don't run into that situation very, very often. Other questions?
Do you know anything about the pass-fail stuff that they're apparently voting on?
That's kind of an open-ended question. What if I say yes?
Tell me what you know.
Okay. What I know is that there is a proposal to add to the current situation another grading option that would be credit, no credit. The difference between credit, no credit and pass, fail is to get credit, you would have to get a C. And to get a pass, you would have to get a D. Okay. So they're going to vote on whether to add that option. The problem with that option is that everyone will soon figure out that if you got a pass, that means you got a D. And if you got a credit, that means you got at least a C. So it's not really doing what it's designed for. I think it doesn't make sense. Personally, I think it doesn't make sense to have both of those systems. But, you know, I don't know what the faculty think about this. The meeting is open. You can go to it if you want today.
What's the link for that?
Let's see. But wait a minute. I don't want you guys to wreck the meeting. Kidding. All right. Yeah, let me see if I can find it. I know I have it. Oh, I know. That'll do. All right. Okay, here is the link. No, that's the agenda. Here is the link. Let me see if I can put it in the chat. Well, that didn't work. Let me try again. Yeah. Okay, I hear you. Okay, so it's https://zoom.us/J as in John/123918740. If you guys all show up, maybe we can break Zoom. That would be fun.
Can you say it again?
Zoom.us/J as in John /12391870.
Thank you.
Anybody else? All right. Well, I will see you Friday then. Have a good couple of days, and maybe I'll see you later this afternoon. Who knows? Thank you.
Thank you.